Today we're going to talk about track, all the different sorts you can get, and also laying of track. When I first started model railroading, when I was about 10 years old, I got a circular track and a clockwork locomotive and one little passenger coach that went with it. And when I wanted to expand the track, I found that Hornby Dublo made it a two-rail type of track that fitted into what I had. So I started off with Hornby two-rail track, and fast forward about 7 or 8 years, and I found this brand, Pico. This is a piece of standard Pico flexi track, and it's easy to work with because it's very flexible. It's what you'd sort of almost call soft, very pliable, and you can bend it round to whatever curvature you need without too much drama. I found that some other makes of track are very stiff to bend, and they can be difficult to work with. While we're on the subject of Shinohara, they make some excellent point work, as in this double crossover and these really long turnouts, which are excellent for high-speed mainline stuff. My rule of thumb with all turnouts, point switches, is that put as long a one as you can in. You'll find that the running's a lot easier. Just looking at some of this stuff here, these are double slips by Pico. They also make a single slip. These curved points by Roco, I think. They're Pico curved points, Pico long straights, medium straight points, lefts and rights. These turnouts here are actually Shinohara, and these are small Pico turnouts. They're okay for in yards and small switching layouts. This Pico turnout here, that's a set track Pico turnout, so it's made with a fairly tight radius, about 18 inches radius as far as I can recall. Another thing that Pico make are these little motors which fit on the bottom of points and facilitate the remote operation of them. You have to cut square holes and things in your baseboard to fit those, so they can be a bit fiddly, but it's usually worth the work. Probably noticed I've got a stack of spare point work piled up here. It's the combination of leftovers from previous layout, and also buying lots of the stuff on places like eBay. If you're patient and keep an eye on things, you'll find quite often a lot of points will come up as one job lot, and it's quite often works out a very economical way to buy them, because even though they're second hand, they're quite often in good condition and usable, and you know how much new stuff's worth. It can get pretty pricey. Double slips out here in Australia are over $70 now each. So you'd want pretty deep pockets to buy all this stuff brand new now, and picking it up second hand can save you a lot of quid for more important stuff like rolling stock. Shinohara also make dual gauge track, and here's a point with dual gauge track, HO on the outside and HON3 on the narrow gauge part of it. I've tended to use a combination of all sorts of stuff on this latest layout that I'm making. This is a Pico curved point leading into the yard, long radius, and here's a long straight one as well. They're good for lead-in switches for yards, so you can keep your trains rolling pretty well. as you get round into the yard, these are the smaller radius ones. They help to give you a bit more length in your sidings. If you haven't got an enormous amount of room to play with, they can help a little bit. Also used a combination of different brands of turnouts. Here's your Pico medium left, and just down the track here, this little Y, that's actually an Atlas one. Now the only problem with some of these turnouts is that you'll see that there's a fair bit of gap in the little crossover piece in there, which can cause derailing problems, and I shall make a little video down the track to show you how to solve that. You can now buy what they call fine scale points, which have much closer tolerances in that area, like this one, which is a pretty latest one, late model one. This curve point is an older one that I have changed into a nice streamline by filling in that little fob. You fill it in with Plastibond and then cut out the grooves afterwards, but as I say, I'll do a detailed one of that later on. Just to add some more confusion to the whole track thing, track comes in codes, and what they're referring to is the actual height of the rail from the base to the top of the rail. And to put it in perspective, code 100 is 100 thousandths of an inch, in other words 1/10 of an inch. So the height of that rail on this piece of code 100 Pico is 1/10 of an inch. And correspondingly, some of this rail craft over here, which has code 70, if you can read that upside down, that means that is 70 thou. You also get code 83 as well, and that's just in HO. So that's something to bear in mind when you're joining rails together, is to, if you're going to mix codes together, you're going to get a height difference. So now that's code 100 on the right and code 70 on the left. That's code 100 on the right and code 83 rail on the left. When it comes to laying the track, there's a few bits and pieces that you're going to need. Now, you're going to need a good razor saw for trimming up flexi track, especially because when you go around the corner, as you know, the inside rail is going to end up apparently longer than the outside rail, and you're going to need to trim that off. And when you're cutting bits to fill in holes and gaps and such like, you're going to need one of those. When you're laying it, quite often your track doesn't come with pre-made holes to put track pins or nails through, so a little drill like that, which is a cheapo version of a Dremel, you can use that to drill little holes in the sleepers where your track pins and nails are going to go. And to hold your little track pins and nails, well, you hit them in with your little hammer. I use this tiny little pair of needle nose pliers. Tiny tools of any description are always handy to have when you're working with model railroads or any other miniatures of any sort. So if you ever see a set of these little tiny pliers, even in your cheap $2 shops, grab them, because they don't have to be industrial strength, but they're ideal for hanging on to your little nail when you want to hit it in your sleeper with your little hammer. To get your spacing between your rails nice and consistent, I made up this highly sophisticated piece of wood here with grooves cut in it, which gives me two centres. I've written it narrow and wide. There's not much difference between the two, but the narrow gives you the correct track centres. If you lined up a pair of points and you had straight adjoining tracks running parallel, and that'll give you the centres to lay your track on, so you can run them and keep them a nice distance apart. If you're going around a slight curve, you use the slight wider one, and that just separates them a little bit more to alleviate any long passenger coaches colliding with one another. And speaking of curves, these little things called track setters, which you're probably familiar with, they come in various radiuses. So if you want a consistent curve, you slide them inside the track as such, and it will bend the flexi track round in that particular curve, and it's got the slots in the holes there, so you can drive your nails home while you've got it in that corner. I use the 60-inch radius track setter to just put this gentle curve in this bit of track here. Here it is from a slightly different angle. Wherever possible on the curves, I've used the 36-inch radius track setter that ensures quite a bit of smooth running, and just adjusted the other tracks to suit. Now with track pins, being a bit of a skinflint, I use tiny bullet head nails, the smallest ones you can buy, which are only a ½ an inch long and a bit over a millimetre or so, or about a 1/16 of an inch thick. And I've found that they work quite well. You can tap them in with your hammer, and until you're certain about having your track in the right spot, you can leave the head sticking up a little bit until you've got it all aligned and nice before you drive it right home. But don't always leave the head sticking out of the top of the sleeper. That way, if you've got a ripped track up, you can get hold of that head with a little set of pliers and pull it out. Joining your track together, your flexi track, of course, you're going to need track joiners. You can buy these by the packet, and metal joiners for continuous electrical conductivity. And when you're making little electrical blocks, you still want to join your track together, but we have little insulating joiners which are made out of plastic. They do the same job as the metal ones, of course, but they don't conduct electricity, so you can isolate little blocks of track. When you're laying tracks over joins of modules, after you've done it, always run a bit of rolling stock in and out, and just make sure everything's lined up nicely, like that. That'll ensure trouble-free running once you start to get serious. Same with any point network. Well, that went well. I'll just try that again. These two have still got X2F couplers on them, or horn hooks as they're commonly known, and they can cause some trouble, as you saw when you're pushing them through points. They can throw things out of whack. That's why it's always a good idea to change over to KDs. They tend to give a lot more even push, and of course they make life a lot easier when you're coupling and uncoupling as well, with the addition of those little magnets you can put in between the rails. But, more on couplers in a slightly later episode. I'll show you how to set KDs up. That's just a bit of an introduction into track. There's an awful lot to cover, so we'll cover it step by step in future episodes as the various situations arise, so stay tuned. We'll see you in the next one. Associated with track, you've got to have ballast, and I'll be exploring all the different ways you can put ballast in, and all the natural materials that you can find and use to save yourself an awful lot of money.